This is a story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it has haunted me into my adulthood. I grew up in a family of avid hikers. Both my mother, a botanist, and my father, a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. Key word being was, as after what I went through, even 20 plus years later, I still refused to return. We lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake Sinclair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone, as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, I didn't mind. It felt like my own little slice of freedom in my own little slice of wilderness, despite being surrounded by people. It was easy to ignore them. But as I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take the quad bike deeper into the park to camp, to test my own abilities and prove to them that I was capable of doing so, and that I wasn't a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to that situation that caused me this trauma. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought I was invincible, knew all there was to know, and was untouchable. After asking my parents for what felt like an uncomfortable number of times and being told no just as many times, I had enough and decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize the daylight and to make it in as far as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp, had some food, and decided to go for an explore. I knew a spot nearby with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought I'd try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized I'd been turned around and had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see it as that big of a deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south, it would take me back to the lake, and I could walk from there. However, by this time it was getting late in the afternoon, so stupidly, I decided to take my chances and make it back to my camp and my quad bike, so I wasn't walking back to the camp from the lake in the dark. Big mistake. It was about 4:30 PM and the sun had begun to dip below the tree line, casting a dark shadow across my walking path. That's when the forest went silent. And when I say silent, I mean silent. No wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. That's when, from every direction, I would hear the sounds of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. No big deal, probably birds or some other small animals, I thought. But then, clear as day, "Hey, come here." At first I felt relieved, as I thought someone along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled and wanted to help. But looking around, I saw no one. Then it happened again, but behind me this time. The same voice. But I noticed it was coming from up in the trees. I responded, "I can't see you, where are you?" and asked for some help because I thought I just couldn't see the person calling out. But then it happened again. From my left this time. That's when I decided to run. I took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way towards the lake. I was terrified, but felt like I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in immediate danger. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard it again. "Hey, come here." But this time it was right behind me. I spun around and saw absolutely nothing, so I began sprinting again and didn't stop. The last thing I heard before bursting out of the trees into the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh I had ever heard. It sounded like 3 people laughing at once. I immediately called my parents to come and get me and told them what I did and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience. The moment they picked me up was the first time I felt relieved, and I cried the whole drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp. Since that day, I haven't stepped foot away from that lake. If anyone has had an experience like this, I'd love to hear it, because it took my passion away from me. I miss being away from society, but I can't bring myself to do it. I once held a hunting lease in the middle of Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot we put lining a creek that bordered the property. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting on the stand, but the forest was abuzz of activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony, and then all of a sudden, silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods were looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyways, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started to walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up from behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path towards the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything I've ever seen before. There was hardly any light to make out the features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, packed up my stuff and got out of there. I just let the lease run out. Never went back after that. So I live in the southeastern corner of South Dakota. There isn't a lot of wooded areas down here, but there is some. My boyfriend and I have been spending lots of time exploring the few wooded areas that we have. Yesterday afternoon we went to this one area. We would not have expected anything to happen because it was still decently close to the town of Brandon. If anything, our concern would have been the people. This park/wooded area has lots of things to explore for the area, and we brought one of his friends with us. We are more intense with our hikes than he is, so he let us leave him behind and we went exploring off the beaten trail and did our own thing. By the time we were getting back to the area we left him, the sun was starting to set and he wasn't there, so we called him up and he said he was headed back to the car. It's important to note that during this time we were making these screams back and forth at each other, trying to see if we could hear each other beyond the phone. My boyfriend and I had one more trail we wanted to explore, so we headed down to that trail, and then eventually it was actually getting dark, so we made it back to the trail that took us back to the car. We were walking through the woods and joking about how our friend was probably going to try and scare us or some shit. We saw a deer and didn't think anything of it, but it slightly startled myself originally. Finally, we made it to this area that is where the woods start to turn into a prairie. We heard this scream, and a really fast deer jumped through this tree that was split into 2 branches. We, being logical, decided to call out to his friend, being like, "Hey, you got us, it's not funny." But it clearly wasn't our friend. We were a little on edge after that, but we just started picking up our pace to get to the car. My boyfriend and I took turns kind of looking back behind us, and I saw what looked like an obese man just kind of standing on the trail behind us. But it had more of a ghost-like presence to it than an actual man. Boyfriend looked back at some point and said, "Hey, I don't want to scare you, but it almost looks like there is a person back there or something." My face just dropped, and I said word for word, "You saw it too?" And then we just kind of looked at each other and ran. We ended up taking this wrong path, so we had to take a longer route. We eventually made it back to the car. His friend was there, and he swears on his life he was not fucking with us. Either way, no way this dude could have ran that fast or looked like what we had saw behind us.